Hello and welcome to today's audiobook. I'm excited to take you on a journey back in time to explore the fascinating history of Bornu, a powerful empire in northeastern central Sudan. We're diving deep into the 19th century, a period of transformation, military struggle, and leadership. In this episode, we'll discuss the decline of Bornu and the remarkable rise of Shehu Muhammad El Kanemi, a man whose influence would reshape the course of the empire's future. At the beginning of the 19th century, Bornu, though still powerful and influential, was facing significant challenges. The empire had control over vast territories, including Hausaland regions like Kono, Zoria, Dora, and Kotsina. However, despite its reach, Bornu was in a military decline. This was a time of great upheaval, marked by the outbreak of the Fulani Jihad in 1804. The state of Bornu was further complicated by the leadership of Ahmed. A blind, old, and weak ruler, Ahmed's inability to defend his empire left Bornu vulnerable to external threats. By 1805, when Kono sought military help from Bornu during the Fulani uprising, the combined forces of Bornu and Kono were decisively defeated at the Battle of Den Yehoya. This loss had far-reaching consequences. The Fulani were quick to take advantage of Bornu's weakened state, carving out new emirates like Hadejia, Katagum, and Damaturu in Bornu's western vassal states. But here's where the story takes a turning point. Despite the Fulani's successes elsewhere, Bornu itself resisted invasion. The empire wasn't going to fall so easily. In 1808, a Fulani force under Gwoni Makta captured Bornu's capital, Gazagomo. It was then that the aged Ahmed called for help. He reached out to a man who would become one of the most pivotal figures in Bornu's history, Muhammad El Kanemi. El Kanemi, a highly educated Muslim scholar and military leader, was living on the western shores of Lake Chad. Known for his deep Islamic knowledge and military acumen, El Kanemi had already led successful campaigns against Fulani forces in his own region. When Ahmed called, El Kanemi saw it as his opportunity to rise to prominence. With an army of Kanembu and Shua Arabs, El Kanemi led a counteroffensive, retaking Gazagomo and restoring Ahmed to power. This marked the beginning of his incredible journey to leadership in Bornu. Now, let's take a closer look at El Kanemi's path to power and the reforms he brought to Bornu. In 1810, after Ahmed's death, his son Maidunima took the throne. However, the Fulani weren't done yet. In 1811, they recaptured Gazagomo, and once again, Maidunima appealed to El Kanemi for help. True to form, El Kanemi delivered a crushing defeat to the Fulani forces and restored peace to the capital. By 1814, El Kanemi had become the de facto ruler of Bornu. Although Maidunima retained the ceremonial title of king, El Kanemi controlled the army, the civil service, and the judicial system. He had secured his power, and this was just the beginning. El Kanemi's influence expanded rapidly. He was not just a military leader but also a visionary reformer. As Chief Justice, El Kanemi reformed the legal system, ensuring fairness and justice for all. He even established a court of appeal, which he personally oversaw. On the social front, El Kanemi's Kanembu followers were settled on land granted by Maidunima. Over time, these Kanembu settlers intermarried with the Kanuri people, fostering cultural unity and strengthening the empire. In terms of trade and infrastructure, El Kanemi was ahead of his time. He promoted the building of roads, ensuring safer travel for merchants and citizens alike. This created an environment where commerce flourished. But perhaps most significantly, El Kanemi reinvigorated Bornu's military. From 1815 to 1826, he reasserted Bornu's supremacy over neighboring states like Kanem and Begumi. He also recaptured all of Bornu's former vassal states from the Fulani, except for a few like Gom and Katagum. By the time El Kanemi died in 1835, Bornu had regained its status as one of the most powerful states in the region. He was not only revered as a military genius but also as a religious reformer, comparable to figures like Usman Dan Fodio. El Kanemi's religious reforms were another hallmark of his rule. He promoted Islam across the empire, enforcing Islamic law and stamping out pagan practices. His own personal piety and moral integrity earned him immense respect. He was viewed by many as a beacon of virtue, and his leadership inspired loyalty and admiration. In the eyes of Major Denham and Clapperton, two Western explorers who visited Bornu in 1823, El Kanemi was an extraordinary figure. They described him as a fearless and a virtuous leader, someone who, subdued more by his generosity, mildness, and benevolent disposition, than by the force of his arms. This perspective from foreign visitors underscores just how unique El Kanemi's leadership was. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a man who inspired greatness not just through military might, but through wisdom, generosity, and religious devotion. The reign of Shehu Muhammad El Kanemi represents one of the most transformative periods in Bornu's history. His military victories, judicial reforms, and promotion of Islam helped restore Bornu to its former glory. Though he never claimed the title of king, his rule shaped the empire for generations. El Kanemi remains one of the most respected figures in the history of the Central Sudan. The decline of Bornu. Shehu Umar succeeded his father, El Kanemi, in 1835 and reigned as Shehu of Bornu until 1880. By this time, Ibrahim, the last of the old Mai dynasty, was a mere puppet ruler with little actual power. He had taken the throne after the death of his brother, Dunama, in 1818. One of Umar's first actions was to weaken the remnants of the old Mai dynasty by reducing the subsidies that El Kanemi had granted to Ibrahim. Now, let's discuss Shehu Umar's major military campaigns. Umar continued his father's policy of trying to reclaim the western provinces of Jimar, Misau, and Katagum, which had been lost to the Fulani and were now under the control of the Sokoto Caliphate. Umar launched several expeditions to stop the Fulani raids into Bornu's western regions, and through his efforts, a final settlement was made between the Sokoto Empire and Bornu over the control of these territories. But Umar's reign wasn't all peaceful. In 1846, he faced a major crisis. Ibrahim, dissatisfied with his powerless position, sought assistance from the Sultan of Wadai, a rising power to the east. While Umar's forces were away on an expedition to Zinda, the Wadai forces took advantage of Bornu's weakened state and invaded the empire. They captured Kukawa, the capital city, and destroyed it. This invasion was a direct challenge to Umar's rule, but the Shehu didn't give up. Upon learning of the attack, he executed Ibrahim and, after initially suffering defeat, Umar rallied his forces. With incredible resilience, he retook Bornu, restored order, and executed Ali Dalatumi, the 17-year-old son of Ibrahim, who had been installed as the new Mai by the Sultan of Wadai. The year 1846 marked a turning point in Bornu's history. With Ali Dalatumi's death, the Mai dynasty that had ruled Bornu for over 1,000 years came to an end. From this point forward, the Shehu dynasty, founded by El Kanemi, became the real ruling power of Bornu. After this victory, Shehu Umar began rebuilding Bornu, focusing on restoring Kukawa, the new capital that his father had founded. The rest of his reign was largely peaceful, with the exception of an internal revolt. In 1853–54, his brother, Abd al-Rahman, attempted to take the throne, but the rebellion was swiftly crushed, and Abd al-Rahman was executed in 1854. Despite these challenges, Shehu Umar became more focused on his religious studies as he grew older. Much like his father, he was deeply religious, and by the end of his reign, he was spending more time in his palace, devoting himself to learning, while the day-to-day affairs of government were left in the hands of his trusted officials. Let's pause and reflect on Shehu Umar's government. His reign left a lasting legacy in Bornu, not only because of his military and religious endeavors but also due to his contributions to state governance. European explorers who visited Bornu during his rule, such as Barth in 1851, Vogel in 1856, Rolfs in 1864, and Nachtigal in 1870, were all deeply impressed with the organization of the state and Umar's personal qualities as a leader. Shehu Umar retained the title of Shehu or Sheikh, continuing the traditions established by his father, El Kanemi. His court structure remained similar to that of the old Umayyad dynasty but was strengthened with some modifications. Umar's Nokina Council, which advised him, included the Mena, royal princes, Kokonawa, civil administrators, and important military commanders. The central government was highly hierarchical and centralized, with appointed governors and military officers who were loyal to Shehu Umar. Bornu's army was also well organized, consisting of 1,000 foot soldiers, 1,000 cavalry, and an additional 3,000 armed men. In times of war, the provinces were required to contribute troops. But despite these strong institutions, Umar's focus on religious matters towards the end of his reign allowed his officials to gain greater autonomy, which led to the weakening of central authority. Umar was deeply committed to Islam. Under his rule, Kukawa became a center of Islamic culture, and efforts were made to integrate non-Kanuri tribes into the Muslim fold. However, as he became more absorbed in religious pursuits, Bornu's administrative and military strength began to erode, leading to internal and external challenges. The causes of Bornu's decline. The first major factor was political weakness. After the crisis of 1853–54, when his brother rebelled, Shehu Umar grew more detached from state affairs. His reliance on his subordinates meant that the powerful vassal rulers and military commanders became increasingly independent. For instance, the Galadima, the ruler of the western provinces, declared himself independent from Bornu's control, and the Sultan of Zinda stopped paying tribute altogether. The weakening of central authority allowed these provincial leaders to act with greater autonomy. Second, socio-political factors, particularly the rivalry between the Shua and Kanuri groups, fueled internal divisions. This struggle for power weakened Bornu from within. And third, there were economic factors. Bornu had once thrived on its control of trade routes across the Sahara, but by the late 19th century, it began to lose much of this trade to the Sokoto Caliphate in the west and the newly emerging state of Wadai in the east. This loss of trade significantly impacted Bornu's wealth and influence. But the external threats were just as dangerous. Wadai, after invading Bornu in 1846, became a serious rival, taking control of Kanem and Begumi by 1890. And then came Rabeh, a ruthless military adventurer from Sennar. In 1893, Rabeh and his disciplined army attacked Bornu, capturing the capital of Kukawa and devastating the empire. The Bornu army, weakened and demoralized, fled before Rabeh's forces. Rabeh then established a new capital at Dikwa and took control of the kingdom. However, his reign was short-lived, as the European powers, France, Britain, and Germany, were rapidly advancing into the region. By 1900, Rabeh was defeated by French forces, marking the end of Bornu as an independent empire. Bornu was eventually divided between Britain, France, and Germany. However, the legacy of Bornu, especially the Shehu dynasty founded by El Kanemi, lives on. The Shehus continued to rule parts of Bornu, with the current Shehu installed in 1968. 3 o'clock Samori Touré and the Mandinka Empire. Samori Touré, the founder of the Mandinka Empire, who fought some of the fiercest battles against European imperialism in the 19th century. Samori Touré wasn't your typical warrior. Unlike the jihads led by figures like Usman Dan Fodio, Samori's wars weren't religious in nature. Instead, he aimed to build an empire in West Africa, a land stretching across the upper Niger River basin, rich in resources and strategic importance. Samori was born around 1830 to 1835, in the small village of Senenkoro, near Kankan in modern-day Guinea. Coming from a Sonic family, Samori started life as a dialer trader until tragedy struck. His mother was captured and enslaved by a local chief, and Samori, driven by a fierce love for his mother, joined the chief's army to free her. From there, Samori's life took a dramatic turn. He became a renowned soldier, but more importantly, he began dreaming of something greater, a unified empire that would bring together the fragmented Mandinka states of Upper Guinea. His military journey began in 1866 when Samori defeated the chief of Komodugu, Fa Modu, and made Bisandigu his capital. From there, he set his sights on surrounding regions, taking control of Toren, Konya, and Wajulang, and by 1873, Samori had captured the city of Kankan. That's when he adopted the Muslim title of Al-Mami, becoming not just a warrior, but the religious and political head of his growing empire. By the late 1870s and early 1880s, Samori's empire extended far beyond his initial conquests, reaching into areas like the Fouta Djallon, Sikasso, and even territories bordering Sierra Leone and Liberia. But with great expansion came great opposition. The French, seeking to extend their colonial reach from Senegal, started clashing with Samori's forces. By 1883, they had taken Bamako, and by 1891, Bisandigu, forcing Samori to retreat eastward. Eventually, the French captured key cities like Sikasso and Bobo Dioulasso, leaving Samori cornered. In 1898, Samori, realizing his options were running out, was forced to negotiate with the French. After a promise of safe passage, he surrendered, but the French broke their word, exiling Samori to Gabon, where he died in 1900. Samori's military strategy was one of the reasons he held off French forces for so long. He built a well-trained army of about 3,000 soldiers, known as soldiers, many of whom were slaves or volunteers. His army wasn't just about numbers, it was about organization. He divided it into 10 regiments, each with its own cavalry, infantry, and supply corps. To equip his forces, Samori relied on both European arms and local blacksmiths. By 1894, when he lost access to European markets, he'd set up workshops that produced up to 200 guns a week. His tactics were equally innovative. Knowing the French had superior artillery, Samori avoided large battles, instead focusing on guerrilla warfare, attacking when and where the French were weakest. Samori also understood the power of diplomacy. Though he was a fierce fighter, he played the European powers off against each other. In 1885, he even offered himself to the British as an ally to fend off the French, but the British were hesitant to commit. His diplomacy with the French included treaties, but as soon as he realized their true intentions, he rejected them. In the end, it was the French who outplayed him, isolating his empire and conquering it piece by piece. But Samori was more than just a warrior, he was an exceptional administrator. His empire was organized into districts and provinces, each with its own chief or governor, often a relative or trusted ally. Local matters were handled by a chief, but Samori had the final say. His administration was highly centralized, with him at the top as both political and religious head, promoting unity through Islam. He also invested in education, every village had a school, and promoted trade across his empire by eliminating local taxes that once divided the region. His revenue system was humane, with light taxes on his people, and he used his resources to fund his military campaigns. Now, Samori's legacy is complex. While some criticize him for the destruction and suffering his campaigns caused, especially the long resistance to the French, it's impossible to deny his historical importance. Samori was the first African leader to effectively use modern military tactics against European imperialists. He earned the title of the Bonaparte of the Sudan for his military genius. He's also seen as a symbol of resistance against colonialism, inspiring later African leaders like Sékou Touré of Guinea, who claimed to be one of his descendants. Samori's ability to unite his people, resist foreign invasion for nearly 2 decades, and create one of the most well-governed empires of his time is remarkable. But ultimately, the French came for him, and his empire was dismantled. Still, his story stands as a testament to African resilience and political savvy. Thank you for joining today on this exploration of African history. Stay tuned for the next audiobook. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe and share it with friends. We'll be back next week with more stories from African history.